She was supposed to be the fresh hope, the new broom sweeping through Buckingham Palace, the woman who had modernised the monarchy. Sarah Ferguson arrived in 1986 as a bride of promise and charisma. But behind the gilt-edged invitations and the 200 million-watched television wedding, there was something else brewing. Something darker. Something the palace has spent decades trying to bury. Because behind the palace walls, nothing was ever what it seemed. Did the royal institution know about her psychological vulnerabilities long before the public discovered them? Or did they deliberately overlook the warning signs? Do you think the palace knew this long before the public did? Drop your theory in the comments below. Sarah Ferguson wasn't born into chaos. She was made by it. Her childhood was a blueprint for disaster. Her mother abandoned her at age 13. Her father was a serial philanderer. Both parents drowned in debt. Both modelled a peculiar aristocratic philosophy that shame doesn't matter, as long as nobody notices. She learned early that arrogance was armour, that entitlement was survival. When she married Prince Andrew in 1986, the public saw a fairy tale. Commentators praised the couple's chemistry, their warmth, their apparent devotion. Unlike Charles and Diana, whose wedding felt like a state funeral, Andrew and Fergie looked genuinely in love. But photographs lie. And so did they. Within months of the wedding, the cracks began to appear. Not publicly, not yet. But inside the palace, those who were close enough to see knew something was profoundly wrong. She was volatile, demanding, reckless with money, contemptuous towards staff. She treated palace employees like servants, which, technically, they were. But even by royal standards, her behaviour was shocking. One member of household staff recalled late-night demands for elaborate meals. Roasts piled upon roasts. Clothes scattered across floors. Laundry hauled to country estates at taxpayer expense. But this was only the first crack in the foundation. The palace had a problem, and that problem wore a red dress and smiled too much. Sarah Ferguson was hemorrhaging credibility in real time. The 1987 Royal Knockout event became her Waterloo. Filmed bouncing around in undignified costumes, she appeared less like a duchess and more like a desperate game show contestant. The press turned, slowly at first, then viciously. But here's what nobody in the media understood at the time. Sarah wasn't just playing a role she was fundamentally unsuited for. She was spiralling from deep psychological wounds that nobody, not even Prince Andrew, truly understood. Do you think Andrew recognised the warning signs in her behaviour? Or was he too self-absorbed to notice? The palace had a choice. They could have supported her, offered therapy, protected her from the media onslaught. Instead, they let her burn. And the truth that followed changed everything. By the early 1990s, Sarah Ferguson had discovered something extraordinary. A truth that would define the rest of her royal tenure. Money could buy silence. Her expenditure became baroque in its excess. £860,000 annually. Think about that number. In a single year, at a time when ordinary British families were rationing. But the spending wasn't random. It was compulsive, psychological. Every purchase was a small act of self-medication. £300,000 on staff, £150,000 on gifts, £50,000 on flowers, £50,000 on parties, £25,000 spent in a single hour at Bloomingdale's, on items she often never opened. Amazon boxes, unopened, for years, piling up in rooms, hoarding the way damaged people hoard when they're terrified of emptiness. And here's the part Buckingham Palace never acknowledged. They enabled it. The palace protected her spending, allowed her to treat crown property like a personal playground, never once demanded accountability. What does compulsive spending really tell us about a person's state of mind? Especially someone with access to the royal purse. But the money wasn't just about self-soothing. It was about control. Sarah Ferguson suffered from arrested development. She herself admitted it. "I'm 59, but I feel 8 years old," she once confessed. This wasn't poetic. This was a diagnosis. She and Prince Andrew shared something deeply disturbing. A refusal to mature. A need to regress into childhood when adult responsibilities became overwhelming. She would dress in funny costumes, make silly voices, play act with children for hours. It was where she felt safest, where the 8-year-old inside her could breathe. But this psychological state had devastating consequences for how she treated everyone around her. The staff suffered first, terrified one moment, adored the next. She would summon palace maids from 4 floors below just to open curtains she could have opened herself. She would demand elaborate meals at midnight, then change her mind, then demand something else. Andrew was even worse. He would hurl plates across rooms, jabbing staff members in the chest, raging about protocol and titles and the proper way to address him. But here's what people need to understand. The palace didn't stop them. They didn't intervene. They didn't set boundaries. Because if they had, it would have meant admitting that the institution itself was complicit in enabling two deeply damaged people to cause suffering without consequence. Do you think the palace staff's silence was bought? Or were they genuinely afraid to speak up? The truth that emerged later would prove far more damaging than anyone anticipated. And then came Epstein. And everything changed. For decades, the palace maintained a careful fiction that Sarah's connection to Jeffrey Epstein was peripheral, recent. A mistake made in naivete. None of it was true. Flight logs prove she travelled on his planes since at least 1998. Her name appeared more frequently in his little black book than Andrew's, 18 numbers to his 16. She was a regular guest at his properties. For years, not months, years. But the most damning evidence came later. Leaked emails from 2011 revealed the stunning hypocrisy. Publicly, Sarah had distanced herself from Epstein, called him a pedophile, said she'd severed all ties. Privately, in those same months, she was writing to him as a dear friend, thanking him for his kindness to the family, maintaining intimate contact even as she pretended publicly to despise him. When confronted with this contradiction, her explanation was almost pathological. She claimed she had been forced to play different roles, public versus private, because Epstein might sue her. A convicted pedophile was not going to sue her for distancing herself. She knew it, the palace knew it, and everybody continued pretending otherwise. How many other powerful people in British society were protecting their own Epstein connections by staying silent about hers? But this wasn't the only hidden relationship that defined her fall. Sarah Ferguson didn't just spend money, she manufactured it. Through a network of companies, shell arrangements, and charitable fronts that make forensic accountants deeply uneasy. Her father began it. Ronald Ferguson literally sold access to his daughter and her new husband. Dinners at Buckingham Palace with Iraqi businessmen. Business arrangements that coincided suspiciously with commercial deals. Sarah learnt the lesson well. She made deals with Hello magazine for exclusive family photographs, millions of pounds. In exchange, no other press coverage was permitted on her charity trips. The charity work itself became increasingly murky. She raised millions for Romanian orphanages. But when researchers tracked the money, very little actually reached the children. Instead, funds were consumed by expenses, administrative costs, vague business arrangements, and somewhere in the shadows, approximately £4 million in gifts from wealthy Middle Eastern benefactors, crown properties, business opportunities, all flowing toward Andrew and Fergie, all arranged with a knowing nod from the palace. Here's the uncomfortable question nobody wants to answer. Was Sarah Ferguson running a charity, or a sophisticated money laundering operation? The palace never investigated, the government never asked. And Sarah continued, year after year, operating with impunity, until the walls began to collapse. By 2022, the revelations had become impossible to ignore. The leaked emails destroyed her carefully constructed public image. The woman who claimed to champion victims of trafficking had spent decades courting the man who trafficked them. Charities began to distance themselves, though some, remarkably, continued to employ her. The cognitive dissonance was almost surreal. Her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, found themselves inheriting not just a scandal, but a moral stain. The palace attempted damage control by giving Beatrice roles in charitable organisations. But it rang hollow. How could anyone take her seriously as a patroness of youth, when her own parents embodied everything wrong with institutional entitlement? Andrew was stripped of his titles, removed from public duties, relegated to Royal Lodge, still protected, still privileged, but officially erased. But Sarah proved harder to eliminate. She reinvented herself, again and again. The palace was left in an impossible position. They couldn't completely destroy her because she knew too much about too many people. They couldn't fully rehabilitate her because public trust had evaporated. So they did what institutions do. They compartmentalised. They waited. They hoped time would soften public memory. It hasn't, and it won't. Sarah Ferguson's downfall wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. The psychological wounds of her childhood never healed. They metastasized. They infected every relationship she touched. They corrupted the institutions that enabled her. She wasn't the villain in this story. She was its most visible victim. But that doesn't absolve her. That doesn't excuse the manipulation, the lies, the calculated reinvention, the betrayal of vulnerable people she claimed to help. And yet, silence remains the most unsettling answer of all. The palace has never acknowledged how deeply they failed her, never asked why they enabled her psychological deterioration, never confronted their own complicity in her descent. because doing so would mean confronting uncomfortable truths about how the institution actually operates, about the price of loyalty, about what happens when damaged people are given unlimited power and no accountability. Sarah Ferguson survived scandals that would have destroyed ordinary people, not because she was resilient, but because the palace chose silence over scrutiny. After everything you've heard today, which part shocked you the most? And do you think the palace still has secrets about Andrew and Sarah that the public has never discovered? Drop your thoughts below. Subscribe for the next royal exposé. And remember, behind every palace photograph, there's a story the institution is desperate to keep hidden.